You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKinnon, but today's case is the suspicious case of actress Dorothy Dandridge. Now, her life was absolutely incredible, and I think many times we put celebrities on a high pedestal as far as we think that our lives could not ever compare to theirs. And in fact, many times we forget that they are human just like us. However, Dorothy's death is something that is not the same as everyone else's because there is a huge conspiracy surrounding it, and the amount of similarities it actually has to Marilyn Monroe will freak you out. By the way, I am posting so much content in October for ODDtober, which is my series where I'm posting the strangest cases that I can find. And if you have any requests, make sure to leave them down below. But make sure to be subscribed so you don't miss any, because they are seriously, I have some completely out of this world type cases coming up. Make sure you are subscribed and turning on that post notification bell so you never miss when I upload. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1965 in California, and Dorothy Jean Dandridge was 42 years old and known by the world. However, she had gotten her start on November 9th of 1922 in Cleveland, Ohio. That is when she was born. Her family consisted of her mother, Ruby, who was a performer from the very beginning, and her father, Cyril. And they had two children, Vivian, who was their oldest daughter, and Dorothy, who was their youngest. And Ruby, of course, because she was a performer, she thought, maybe her daughters had some talent, so she wanted to try to put together a little song and dance number for the two of them. And they were so good at it, and she thought that they could really make a living doing this, so she created a little family group number called the Wonder Children. This was actually pretty successful, even earning the girls their own manager, and they began to tour around the southern United States for 5 years, meaning that the girls didn't get a ton of schooling or education when they were younger because they were on tour and making money so much. Eventually, their parents would get divorced, and their father, who was a cabinet maker and minister, who was making more of the money, of course, then separated from them, and they stayed with their mother, who performed for a living. And so they were really doing some of the work as far as making money for the family. Everyone loved these little girls and seeing how much talent they had within them at a very young age. However, their luck and success would kind of vanish with the Great Depression, and Ruby knew she had to take care of her daughter somehow, and thought the best way to do this would be to move to Hollywood, where she could continue performing and making more money. So they did so, and at this time the girls actually did go back to school at McKinley Junior High, while working odd jobs on the weekends and after school, and continuing to work on their performance skills to make money for the family as well, while Ruby was working all of the time as a performer as much as she could. And actually, one of the first roles that Dorothy nabbed was on a show called Our Gang, which would later be known as The Little Rascals. She was known as just the cabin kid. It was just kind of a side little minor character role, but it was something, and I thought that was quite interesting, considering we talked about Alfalfa earlier this week and the strange death of him. And if you haven't watched that, I'll link it for you down below to watch after this. Then in 1934, Ruby decided it was time to bring back the family act once again and see if they could continue it to make money that way. And this time it wouldn't be just the Wonder Children and the two of them. It would actually be the two girls, the two sisters, and their friend from school who was also a dancer named Etta Jones. And this worked really well. They were known as the Dandridge sisters, and they had even more success than the Wonder Children had. They were performing at huge Hollywood nightclubs like the Cotton Club, the Apollo Theater, and this put them on tour on an even bigger scale than before. They were touring North America in its entirety and even going to Europe at times. Now, Dorothy, who often went by Dot, began to take on several roles as an independent actress, as well as being in the Dandridge sisters, just so she didn't confine herself to only being in this group. And she was actually getting a lot of roles, unfortunately, at this time in Hollywood, and still sometimes today, actually a lot of times today, Hollywood only will cast black men and women as minor characters, never making them the lead role. This is something that, especially back then when Dorothy was in film, this was not something that they were even going to talk about. They didn't care about giving her any sort of role, even though she was just as talented, if not more talented, than the actresses who were the leads. In 1940, she finally got a film where she was one of the bigger roles. However, this was her being cast as a murderer. After that, she avoided any sort of violent characters because she knew that this was the only role that people of any sort of color would be awarded if they just continued to keep taking only those, and she knew she had more talent and deserved better than that, so she refused to take any like that. In 1942, Dorothy would marry Harold Nicholas, who was a member of the Nicholas brothers, who were basically tap dancers who were highly acrobatic. They were very popular. They toured around all the time, meaning that Harold was often not with Dorothy, and he was also not very committed to her either. However, Dorothy did get pregnant and did have a little girl named Carolyn. Unfortunately, there were a lot of complications at birth, which caused her to be mentally delayed and ultimately resulted in Dorothy and Harold getting a divorce. Now, Dorothy had to fully support herself and her daughter, who had extremely expensive medical bills, and so she went back into Hollywood at full force. And by 1951, she was actually on the cover of Ebony magazine because press had been talking about her a lot and putting her back in the spotlight, apparently because she had dressed provocatively. She seemed not like a woman to just flaunt it all. However, if that's what she wanted to do, that would have been fine. But she had, on one of her movie sets, told the director that even though they wanted someone in a bikini the whole movie, that's not what she wanted to do. So I can't see her doing anything too crazy, but it was said that the press were talking about this, and it launched her back into the spotlight. This got her a role in the Harlem Globetrotters at the time, and she was also opening a club in West Hollywood. And this is where an agent at MGM Studios, which is of course the huge studio, would see her and decide to cast her in an upcoming movie. This is when she landed her first starring role in Remains to Be Seen. And 2 years later, in 1953, she would be cast in Carmen Jones as Carmen. Now, this was not because they willingly gave this role to her. In fact, she had to go into the executive's office and basically confront him, saying that she deserved the role and did not want to be the minor character that they were going to cast her as. And so after some fighting, she finally got the role, and it was well deserved. This would make $10 million in the box office, and also she was thought to be Hollywood's first African-American sex symbol. I don't really know how she felt about this at the time, if she was happy she was in the spotlight and didn't really care, or if this kind of affected her mental health and she didn't really enjoy being called this, but nonetheless, this is what she was known as at the time, and this would actually lead her to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress. She was up against Grace Kelly, Audrey Hepburn, Judy Garland, and Jane Wyman, and she didn't win. However, being nominated was enough to get her name out there. She was also the first black female nominee for Best Actress, and she was also the first black woman on the cover of Life. It boggles my mind that she is not very talked about today, considering she made waves in Hollywood and just continued to impress people everywhere. And the talent that this woman exuded was breathtaking. She was not only beautiful, but she was also talented, and she was ferocious. She knew how to get what she wanted. She was still nice while doing so. She is a definite role model, and her fame just escalated from there. The director of Carmen Jones, named Otto Preminger, began to get cozy with Dorothy at this time and for a few years after Carmen Jones, and told her some advice, and she took this advice because he was a director. However, it would not necessarily be the best advice, and he had told Dorothy that she should only accept starring roles, and of course that's what she wanted. Sometimes you're not always going to get the starring role, and this would cause Dorothy to slowly no longer get any. In 1955, Dorothy would actually get pregnant with Otto's baby, and because Otto was having an affair on his own wife, the studio forced Dorothy to have an abortion, and at this point, Dorothy ended the affair altogether. Dorothy then signed a 3-movie deal with 20th Century Fox. However, in 1957, she would be involved in a scandal that was false. However, it would definitely taint the public's view of her just a little bit. And this tabloid was accusing her of having casual flings in hotel rooms. They were doing this to other actresses too, but mainly Dorothy. And Dorothy wasn't putting up with this at all. In fact, she sued them for defamation of character and got $10,000. And I'm telling you, this woman was a force to be reckoned with. And many refer to Dorothy as the Black Marilyn Monroe. Dorothy also did her best to use her power for good, the power that she did have. She was involved in the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, as well as the National Urban League. And she knew that even though she was lucky, that the color of her skin, her race, did hold her back in some ways, and she was even once quoted saying, "If I were Betty Grable, I could capture the world." She got remarried in 1959, however 3 years later got divorced due to financial issues as well as domestic violence, and at this time she also found out that her financial manager had stolen $150,000 from her and had also not paid taxes, so she owed $139,000 in taxes as well, meaning she was doing very, very horribly in the money department. Once again, a single mother, Dorothy had to sell her place in Hollywood and put Haralyn, her daughter, in a mental institute because she couldn't take care of her anymore. And Dorothy at this time was moving in and out of her apartment. She was calling people, accusing them of stealing, like the neighbors that were stealing her stuff, so she continued to move to different apartments. She wasn't getting any more roles in Hollywood, and it's, was this because she was only said to take starring roles, or was this because none were coming her way? I'm not sure. But then on September 8th of 1965, Dorothy would call a friend, and she was extremely happy because she had just booked a job and was going to leave the next day to fly out there and go to it. And she even sang Barbra Streisand's song People. She ended the phone call saying, "Whatever happens, I know you will understand." Dorothy was to fly to New York the next day for her job. However, she would never make it because her manager would find her only a few hours later after he had to break into her apartment using a tire iron to get the door open. He would find her laying naked and unconscious with a blue scarf tied in her hair and perfume on her body. And this is where the suspicion came in because, of course, everyone came to examine her body, and a Los Angeles Pathology Institute would say that her cause of death was an accidental overdose on her antidepressant medication. However, then a LA coroner's office would say there was no sign of foul play, suicide, or an accident. So then they wrote that it was an accident, suicide, and undetermined. So nobody really had a clear answer on what had happened, nor could they agree with even themselves. They then said that she had died of a fat embolism, which was from the right foot fracture she had had 5 days prior, and this is when the fat enters the bloodstream and it occurs from fractures of bones. But this causes blockages in the lungs and the brain. However, it's highly uncommon. She was cremated a few days later, and her ashes were spread at the Forest Lawn Memorial Park, but this also meant that no more autopsies could be done on her body. And according to the Last Ovation podcast, a few months prior to Dorothy's death, she had given her manager an envelope, and on the front it read, "Whomever discovers me after death, important." And inside this envelope, it said, "In case of my death, to whomever discovers it, don't remove anything I've had on, scarf, gown, or underwear. Cremate me right away. If I have anything, money, furniture, give it all to my mother, Ruby Dandridge. She will know what to do." Many theories have come out about her death. Was it a suicide or was she murdered? Her friends say that she was the happiest she had ever been, or at least in quite a long time. However, it makes me wonder if this is because she has decided her fate at this time. You know, when you are about to stop doing something that makes you so incredibly unhappy, like you have a bad job, you've put in your 2 weeks, you begin to get happy over those 2 weeks, even if you continue to do the thing you hate because you know it's coming to an end. I wonder if this is almost the way Dorothy felt as well. Why was she naked and why was perfume on her body? This almost makes me think that possibly someone was coming over or was over, and that's why she had perfume on to make herself smell nice, and maybe they were doing something, which is why she didn't have her clothes on, and maybe that's when something occurred. Possibly not by her own doing. And why were they certain that this cause of death was an overdose? Why was it so speculated, and why could nobody make up their mind? And how in the world are we not supposed to have conspiracies when she is basically compared to Marilyn Monroe? I mean, that's just, it's a crazy coincidence that she died in such a similar way, and it makes you truly think maybe it wasn't by her own doing. But something I was very interested in reading about was the song that Dorothy had sang to her friend on the phone. I think that a lot of times music is how we communicate in certain ways. So I looked up Barbra Streisand's People and looked up the lyrics. I'm going to read them to you right now to see if you can find anything in them that would lead to possibly a suicidal mindset or being in danger. So let me read them to you. People who need people are the luckiest people in the world. We're children needing other children and yet letting a grown-up pride hide all the need inside. Acting more like children than children, lovers, very special people. They're the luckiest people in the world. With one person, one very special person, a feeling deep in your soul says you are half now, you're whole. No more hunger and thirst. First be a person who needs people. People who need people are the luckiest people in the world. Kind of in some ways can sound like a cry for help, or it could just be a beautiful message to a song that she loved and wanted to sing it. We may never know what really happened to this beautiful and talented actress. However, she has not been forgotten, especially more recently. Halle Berry actually won the Academy Award for Best Actress as the first black woman to do so, and of course we know that Dorothy was the first black woman nominated, and Halle Berry actually dedicated the award to Dorothy Dandridge, and Halle Berry actually knows a ton about Dorothy and kind of looks up to her in a way from what I get out of it, and it's super cool to see that even after all these years Dorothy is still being supported and talked about. And Dorothy was also given a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but I'd love to know what you think. I mean, I can truly see why people do think it's a suicide. I mean, her life was kind of on a more downhill compared to the ups that she had in her career. But there are just certain things that make it seem a little iffy. So I don't really know, but I hope that this was a good one for ODDtober. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you come back for the next one. And don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.